I'm Elena Vasquez, and 5 years ago, Victoria Sterling made it crystal clear that I wasn't worthy of breathing the same air as her precious son. Tonight, I walked into her charity gala wearing a dress that cost more than she spent on flowers for that engagement party where she publicly humiliated me. But she didn't recognize me at first. To her, I was just another wealthy patron in designer silk, someone worth schmoozing for donations. She had no idea she was shaking hands with the woman who'd been anonymously writing seven-figure checks to keep her precious foundation afloat. The woman she'd dismissed as just a waitress now controlled whether her charity empire lived or died. And tonight, I was finally ready to let her know. This isn't about revenge. It's about showing someone exactly what they threw away when they chose cruelty over kindness. It's about the moment when arrogance meets consequence and consequence wins. 5 years earlier, the engagement party was supposed to be perfect. James had proposed 3 months before, and despite my protests about the expense, he insisted on celebrating at his family's country club. I worked double shifts for 2 weeks to afford a decent dress, navy blue and simple, but it fit perfectly and made me feel beautiful. I should have known better. Victoria Sterling swept into the room like she owned it, which technically she did. Diamonds at her throat, champagne-colored silk that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and that smile she reserved for people she was about to destroy. She kissed James on both cheeks, complimented the flowers, and then turned to me. "Elena," she said, voice dripping with false warmth. "How lovely. And where did you two meet again?" "At Morrison's," I said quietly. "The restaurant downtown. I was working there when—" "Oh, that's right," she interrupted, loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. "You're a waitress." The way she said it made it sound like a disease. James squeezed my hand, but he didn't defend me. He never did when his mother was involved. "Mom," he said weakly, "Elena's also studying business administration. She's incredibly smart." "Of course she is." Victoria smiled that razor-sharp smile. "I'm sure she's very resourceful." Her eyes raked over my dress, my shoes, the small pearl earrings that had been my grandmother's. "But James, darling, you have to think about your future. About the kind of woman who can stand beside you in your world." "What do you mean?" I asked, though I already knew. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt louder than shouting. "You'll never be good enough for my son." "A waitress? Really?" "James needs someone with breeding, with connections. Someone who can help build his career, not hold it back." The room spun slightly. I felt James tense beside me, but still he said nothing. Victoria straightened, her public smile returning. "Of course, if you truly love him, you'll want what's best for him, won't you?" I nodded because I couldn't trust my voice. Then I excused myself to the bathroom and cried silently for 10 minutes, careful not to smudge my mascara. When I returned, Victoria was holding court with James's business school friends, loudly discussing his bright future, and the right kind of partner he'd eventually find. The message was clear. I was temporary. A phase. A mistake he'd outgrow. That night, I told James we needed to talk. He knew what was coming. "She doesn't mean it the way it sounds," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Yes, she does," I replied. "And the worst part is, you're letting her." We broke up 2 weeks later. He said he loved me, but he loved his family's approval more. I moved out of our shared apartment and back into my studio above the bakery. I kept working, kept studying, and kept the engagement ring in a drawer as a reminder of exactly how the world saw me. But I also did something else. I started planning. The first year was the hardest. I worked 3 jobs: waitressing at Morrison's, tutoring business students, and doing bookkeeping for small restaurants that couldn't afford proper accounting. I saved every penny that wasn't absolutely necessary for survival. I researched. I studied. I learned. By year 2, I'd saved enough to make my first investment. A tiny stake in a struggling restaurant chain. I used everything I'd learned serving tables, which locations worked, which menus sold, how to maximize turnover without losing quality. The investment tripled in 8 months. I reinvested everything. Then again. And again. By year 3, I owned controlling shares in 12 restaurants across the city. By year 4, I'd expanded into catering, event planning, and hospitality consulting. I built an empire one careful decision at a time, fueled by the memory of Victoria Sterling's sneer and James's silence. And through it all, I did something Victoria would never understand. I gave back. I started anonymously donating to local charities. Small amounts at first, then larger ones. I researched which organizations actually made a difference, which ones were run by people who cared more about impact than image. That's how I found the Sterling Foundation. Victoria's pet project, her social crown jewel. On paper, it looked impressive. Galas, fundraisers, board meetings with all the right people. But when I dug deeper, I found the truth. They were hemorrhaging money. Bad investments, expensive overhead, more focus on looking charitable than actually being charitable. They were 6 months from bankruptcy. So I saved them. Not out of kindness. Out of strategy. I became their largest anonymous donor, funneling money through shell companies and offshore accounts. 7 figures a year, enough to keep them afloat and growing. Enough to make Victoria feel successful and important. I wanted her to build her empire on my foundation. I wanted her most precious achievement to depend entirely on the woman she'd dismissed as worthless. And then I wanted her to know. The invitation arrived on cream-colored cardstock with gold embossing. The Sterling Foundation's annual charity gala. Black tie required. Donations encouraged. I RSVP'd under my married name, Elena Castellanos. I'd married Miguel 2 years earlier, a brilliant architect who loved me exactly as I was. Victoria wouldn't recognize the name, but she'd definitely noticed the donation amount I'd pre-pledged. I spent the morning at the spa and the afternoon with a personal shopper. The dress was midnight blue silk, custom-tailored, with a neckline that was elegant but commanding. The jewelry was understated, but unmistakably expensive. The shoes were Christian Louboutin, red soles that clicked with authority against marble floors. I looked like money. Old money, new money, the kind of money that spoke so softly everyone had to lean in to listen. The country club looked exactly the same, but I felt like an entirely different person walking through those doors. The last time I'd been here, I'd left in tears. Tonight, I was returning as someone Victoria Sterling would kill to impress. She didn't recognize me at first. 5 years had changed my hair, my posture, my entire presence. I moved through the cocktail hour like I belonged, accepting champagne from waiters who looked exactly like I used to look, making polite conversation with board members who assumed I was someone worth knowing. Victoria was in her element, gliding between donors in a gown that probably cost more than a car. She was older now, lines around her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide, but still imperious. Still certain that the world revolved around her approval. "Mrs. Castellanos," she purred when we were finally introduced. "I don't believe we've met. Thank you so much for your generous pre-donation. The foundation is thrilled to have your support." "Of course," I smiled. "I believe in supporting causes that make a real difference." We chatted for a few minutes about the foundation's work, the evening's program, the usual charity gala small talk. She was charming, attentive, everything she'd never been to the waitress who dared to love her son. Then the auction began. I waded through the first few items. A weekend at a vineyard. A private dinner with the mayor. Art pieces and jewelry and vacation packages. Victoria worked the room like a conductor, encouraging bids, celebrating victories, basking in the success of her event. Then they brought out the evening's centerpiece. A week-long stay at an exclusive resort in Monaco, donated by one of the foundation's board members. Starting bid, $50,000. The bidding was spirited but predictable. $75,000. $100,000. $125,000. The usual suspects raising their paddles, showing off their wealth while Victoria beamed from the stage. At $150,000, the bidding stalled. The auctioneer was about to call it sold when I raised my paddle. $200,000, I said clearly. The room went quiet. Victoria's head swiveled toward me, eyebrows raised in surprise and delight. This was exactly the kind of dramatic generosity her galas were designed to produce. The bidding resumed, but half-heartedly. $225. $250. Then silence. "Going once," the auctioneer called. I raised my paddle again. $500,000. Gasps echoed through the ballroom. Victoria actually applauded, her face glowing with triumph. This was the kind of moment that would make headlines, that would cement her foundation's reputation. "Sold," the auctioneer announced. "For $500,000 to Mrs. Castellanos." The applause was thunderous. Victoria was already making her way toward me, probably planning to introduce me to everyone important, to bask in the reflected glory of my generosity. But I wasn't done. As the crowd settled and the auctioneer prepared for the next item, I stood up. The room quieted again, sensing something significant about to happen. "Before we continue," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the sound system, "I have something to say." Victoria beamed at me from the stage, probably expecting a gracious speech about the importance of charity. I pulled out my phone and opened the banking app, then turned the screen toward the crowd. The account balance was clearly visible, $47 million. Mrs. Sterling, I said, looking directly at Victoria. 5 years ago, you told me I'd never be good enough for your son because I was just a waitress. The color began draining from her face as recognition dawned. You said James needed someone with breeding, with connections. Someone who could help build his career instead of holding it back. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Victoria's mouth opened, but no sound came out. I want to thank you, I continued, my voice steady and clear. Because that humiliation taught me something valuable. It taught me that my worth isn't determined by what other people think of it. I pulled out a folder from my purse and held it up. These are the donation records for your foundation over the past 3 years. $7.2 million from various anonymous sources. All of them traced back to my companies. The silence in the room was deafening. You built your reputation on my money, Mrs. Sterling. Your foundation exists because the waitress you dismissed has been keeping it alive. Victoria's face was now completely white, her hands trembling as she gripped the podium. So here's what's going to happen, I said, putting my phone away. I'm withdrawing my support. All of it. The anonymous donations stopped today. The pledged contributions are canceled. And this $500,000 bid? I'm retracting it. I stood up, smoothing my dress. Good luck finding someone else to fund your empire. I'm sure there are plenty of people with the right breeding and connections who'd be happy to write 7-figure checks. I walked toward the exit, my heels clicking against the marble floor. Behind me, the room erupted in whispers and gasps. Victoria's voice cut through the chaos, shrill and desperate. Elena, wait. Please, we can discuss this. I turned at the door. Oh, now you remember my name? Miguel was waiting in the car, looking devastatingly handsome in his tuxedo. How did it go? He asked as I slid into the passenger seat. Better than I hoped, I said, pulling out my phone to call my lawyer. Cancel all the Sterling Foundation accounts. Transfer the funds to the Children's Hospital Foundation instead. As we drove away, I caught a glimpse of Victoria in the rearview mirror, standing in the doorway of the country club, looking lost and desperate and very, very small. James called the next morning. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail asking if we could talk, saying his mother was devastated, that maybe we could work something out. I deleted it without listening to the whole thing. Some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt. Some people aren't meant to be forgiven. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's simply becoming so successful that their opinions become irrelevant. Victoria Sterling had been right about one thing. I wasn't good enough for her son. I was too good for him.